This is Writer Life, a podcast about writing, life, coffee and conversation with Rob and John Morgan.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Writer Life podcast. This is going to be the 7th episode. Today what I want to do is I want to go back to the very beginning, and I want to look at what was the first book I ever wrote and published, and I want to look at the very beginnings of Heirs to the Kingdom and try and get back into that mindset of where I was 15 years ago when I first sat in front of the PC and started to write down what would be the foundations of an 8-book series. As you can see by the title of today's episode, it's called The Start of a Kingdom. And this really is, where it all began. And I had no idea really at that time how my life would change and how involved I would become in piecing this story together. And there's a lot of people out there that have read the Bowman of Loxley, which is the first book in the series. Today what I want to do is kind of look back and give my take on where the story came from, what was the main focus of the story, and how it all came together to develop into the story that everyone has read. The last year has been a time of great reflection for me as I've pulled apart Heirs to the Kingdom whilst writing what was the new 3-book story arc. Not only have I looked at the darker aspects of the series in order to write characters such as Branner and Morgana, I've also looked at the lighter aspects of the story as I've taken my time to remember how 15 years ago I actually built the foundations of the series by creating the main characters of Robbie, Rune, Jade, Rowan, Alice and Billy. 2 most influential characters of the story were obviously Runestone and Robbie, as to a degree this was always really going to be their story. And recently I completed what will be the last of the new story arc books, which features Robbie and Runestone long after the last book of Heirs to the Kingdom. Now, like all things in life, in this final tale they've aged. Runestone is now 38 years old and Robbie is 1 year older. And they are parents to 5 children, the youngest of which is 7. Iona is almost 18, as is her brother Halbert Thorne. And so for Robbie and Runestone, their role in life compared to Heirs to the Kingdom, the series, is very different from those early pages of book 1. Now, I cannot deny, if I was to write the Bowman of Loxley today, it would possibly be a little different. Because as a writer, I've come a long way since what was, back then, my first book. But there is an innocence and a quality to that first book, which I feel I would not change if I wrote it as a new story today. And that would be in the development of how Robbie and Runestone got together. I've often wondered if people saw the story as I meant it to be read, insomuch as back then Robbie was a bit of an awkward teenager trying to understand his feelings, especially around Runestone, and he was also trying to fill the shoes of his father, who was the leader of the community and a man who was very well respected by all. And to a degree, Robbie puts himself under a lot of pressure to live up to his father's reputation, and he's also trying to work out how he can approach Runestone. Now, Runestone, on the other hand, whilst being a little nervous and shy at first, also had another quality to her. At that time, she'd been educated by her grandfather Leonard, so she was very clever, but most importantly, as the Bowman of Loxley reveals later in the story, she's also nature personified in a human form, and the story had to reflect that in a subtle way from page 1. Robbie's first real encounter with Runestone is when Leonard invites him in to have tea after Robbie offers to share his bag of freshly baked scones, where Leonard notes his interest in Runestone, but also his lack of certainty on how to approach her. Now Leonard, being who he is, he arranges archery lessons because he is aware that his granddaughter feels the same attraction to Robbie. And so he plays a little bit of matchmaking, striking a deal to bring the two youngsters together in a classroom situation and ensuring that they get time alone during the archery lessons. It's all part of a very clever plan by Leonard. Now, another important aspect of the match is also the work of Alice, Robbie's cousin, who to a degree Robbie kind of sees more like a sister if they've grown up side by side. Now, Alice is the best friend of Runestone, and so naturally they have talked, and Alice plays her part in giving Robbie a nudge in the right direction with a little good advice. The archery lesson leads to Robbie requesting that Runestone and Jade, who's her sister, join him and Billy on a hunting trip, of which he must first get the consent of Runestone's mother, Stephanie. Something Robbie is quite nervous about. I mean, after all, he will be taking her daughters outside of the compound into the deep woodland, which the story later reveals is not always the safest of places. Now, for the two girls, this is a big deal. Robbie at this point knows Jade better than he does Runestone. Jade and him are pretty good friends in the stockade, but his interest is Runestone, and so he partners Jade with Billy, hoping moments alone with Runestone will help her to like him more. His uncertainty is very apparent, and like all boys his age, he hopes that by looking skilled and being more manly, he will win her over. Something that she finds to be a little bit comical, but she plays along with it. Okay, so at this point in the story, the reader is not aware of the backstory, which, as we find out, is a lot more complicated than Robbie is actually aware of. Runestone's family line is significant, and her destiny is already preordained to a degree that no matter what she thinks and feels, her future has been dictated over many years, and her family are very aware of the responsibility that she will have placed onto her shoulders. Runestone's natural instincts are powerful, and they're well ahead of others. She's also very intelligent, but like all young 16-year-old girls, at this point, she's driven by her attraction. And as we find out in Book 5, it goes back a long time to her very first encounter with Robbie when she was only 5 years old. What Runestone observes as a small girl looking through the gates of her mother's house and actually seeing Robbie, she's not fully aware of at that time, actually is her feelings are partly driven by her instincts. He was her destiny, but at that time no one apart from her really could understand that. Now if you move back to the current day, and Runestone is hyper aware that Robbie is very popular with the young girls around the stockade, even if he's not actually aware of it himself. If you think about it, he is the son of the leader of the area. He is a future heir to the land. He's tall, he's stocky, and he's pretty good looking, all of which make Runestone even more insecure, because he actually is the best catch for any woman in the area, and she's bright enough really to understand that. Now this drives her shyness and some of her insecurities, because she can see how other girls flirt with him, especially Melissa in the cheese shop, who is driven by her grandmother, the village gossip Agatha Patterdale. Now it's clear Agatha's got an agenda. She wants to match her granddaughter with possibly the future most powerful person in the stockade. So Agatha encourages Melissa to fraternize with Robbie. Runestone's biggest fear is that Robbie is oblivious to all of this and just thinks that the girls are being nice and polite. Runestone knows the difference, and she lives in fear that Melissa will get her hooks into Robbie first. The hunting trip, which brings them together, has been helped along by Leonard and Alice, and given a little push by Runestone's mum, who is pretty much aware of how Runestone feels. This is Runestone's best chance to make an impression and hopefully win him over, because although she hides it well, the truth is she has fallen very much in love with him, and after their archery lesson, she really does know for certain she has an interest and is hoping that she can get him to see how much she really wants to be with him. Now Jade is in on all of this, even though she kind of fancies her chances with Robbie herself. But because Jade has been the only person that Runestone has ever been able to really share her feelings with, because they are very close as sister, Jade runs resistance, and she ensures no other female gets too close to him by interfering when other girls have tried to lure Robbie in the past. Those first few moments outside the stockade in the wild woodland, they're a little bit tense, and both Robbie and Runestone are very nervous, and they're a little bit unsure. I mean, they're young, they're not used to this, they've never done it before. And so it is here that we begin to see Runestone takes her steps to acknowledging the truth of who she really is. Her interactions with Robbie are very attentive, very close. She's very feminine as she tries to appeal to his natural male instincts. Her small interactions, such as sliding up close, taking his hand to let him guide her, all play into her natural female charms, whilst also allowing him to take what he thinks is the lead, and his masculine self takes over. Now, to a degree, this helps Robbie to relax a little and gain more confidence around her, which she actually encourages, knowing it will make a lasting mark on him. This is one of the most important aspects of the whole story, because in the first 3 chapters of the first book, the foundations are being created for what will become the central core of the whole series. This is Robbie and Runestone's story. The whole tale will evolve around the power that is created between them as they come together and they face an uncertain future as they fight for the survival of not only their own home, but for the whole country. What Robbie and Runestone build together in those very first few chapters will become the dream that they both harbour for every soul in the land. Their dream is a home and some land around it to live on and grow food as they build a family. That is what they fight for, to allow everyone the right to live as they so choose. Now, at this part of the story, neither of them is really aware of what is to come, but there are telltale signs there. So when Robbie discovers footprints in the mud, because his father has trained him all of his life, he instantly understands that those boot marks are not made by any person living in the area, because all of the locals wear a different kind of footwear. His own instincts from his trainings kick in, and he naturally takes the leadership role, something he's never done before, and his first priority becomes the safety of the girls. Now Runestone watches on, seeing him in a role he will assume later in his life, and that just adds to her attraction, and that starts really, to start and grow stronger. She's got no idea why, but on some sort of unconscious level, she knows already that he is the right man for her. A small part of future Runestone slips out, where she makes it clear she's got no intentions of standing around while Billy and Robbie walk into danger, and she refuses point blank to wait. Runestone makes it clear she's staying at his side, and at that moment I feel the readers are probably not quite aware that she does not just mean this for this situation. Runestone actually means forever. The whole situation around Joe's cabin and their encounter with the Cutters, to a degree, becomes a pivotal moment, because Rob is distracted by the unfolding events. It's here that Runestone gets to see more of the real person he actually is, which is the boy trained by Robert Lox. Robbie's an accomplished woodsman. He is actually a lot more like his father than he realizes. And as the situation turns dangerous, that aspect of Robbie comes to the fore. If you take a step back and you try to look at this from Runestone's point of view, Runestone finally gets to see the man who will one day lead. And it's everything that she hoped it would be, which confirms her instincts that this is the man she's always dreamed of. She watches as his confidence as a leader grows, and less of the bragging boy is on display, as Robbie steps up to the plate and ensures all of them make it through and safely into Joe's cabin. Hunting and Hunted is a very, very important chapter in the book, even though it's only the third chapter, because to a degree, this is the chapter that sets up the theme and the pace for the rest of the book. All the vital ingredients are within this one chapter. Robbie's love of nature, his understanding of his surroundings, the life that he actually lives, and most importantly, is the only life he's ever really known. All of these things have one thing in common. They're all based in nature. His whole life evolves around the natural world, which is something he lives and breathes, and harbours a very deep love and understanding of. Now, considering Runestone is nature, it is her family line. Without really understanding, Robbie is drawn to her simply because she actually stands for everything he is, how he lives, and his deepest passion, the green world. Robbie's been drawn to Runestone all of his life for that very reason, even if he does think she's quite out of his league. And it is the same for Runestone, who has felt drawn to him since her arrival in Loxley. It is clear that there's a powerful force at work here, and to a degree neither Robbie or Runestone are fully aware of it. But Rune is without doubt being driven by instincts far more powerful than anyone at that point actually realizes. On their return home to Loxley, there are some revelations that are a huge surprise. The fellowship of the Bowman, for one. And once again, the status of Robbie is increased, which he's not altogether at ease with, but he accepts it as Runestone steps up to his side with her commitment to stand with him no matter what. Their relationship is not sealed, they are a couple, and as such their lives become intertwined more as they plan their trip and look to what the future may bring, as what they do not really fully understand yet is that a fight for the survival of their people is about to begin, and it will bring with it death, tears, and joy. The arrival of Harry in Loxley brings with it information that is vital to how all of the story will develop, and that leads Robbie to formulate a plan that will take him outside of Loxley with Runestone. Now, once again, this is a very, very important moment, because it is at this point we learn that Runestone has gifts in the form of unnatural powers, and her mother Stephanie has been hiding it from Mason Knox because of it. Steph confides some of that information in Robbie. It is clear to her that Runestone is deeply in love with Robbie, and so Steph starts to prepare Robbie for what a future with Runestone might entail. It's during this process that Robbie stays over at the house, and with Harry passed out in the chair, Runestone awakens Robbie, who is sleeping on the sofa, and she initiates lovemaking, and they make love on the sofa and fall asleep together in each other's arms. Now, I can remember when the book came out, and that particular moment raised a few eyebrows. It appeared to some that a 16-year-old girl taking the lead and seducing the man she loves, well, it caused a few ripples. The fact is, she is nature, and so all things contained within life come easily to Runestone. Lovemaking is a natural act with those you love and want to be intimate with. And so as the author, I felt it went without saying that two teenagers would move into that phase of their relationship. Now, the fact that it was Runestone that led the start of it. Now, to myself, that was not at all surprising. If anything, one would assume that the personification of the natural world would not even think about it. They would just naturally act. Sleeping together cemented their relationship, which was vital to the whole series, and once that happened, they were bonded deeply, which they would need as they headed out of Loxley and into the wilds to confront the reality of what was happening across the whole of the country. Even though both of them felt more assured in themselves, it was never going to be a smooth sail, as both of them were still teenagers and not just discovering each other. They too were learning about who they were and who they would become. There are moments of insecurity and lapses of self-confidence, none more so than when Runestone starts having bad dreams, and she awakens one morning and freaks completely out when Robbie points out that the whites of her eyes have turned a soft lilac. Now, like all young teens, looks are very important, and so a change as obvious as this one completely panics Runestone, and she fills with insecurity. The coming of powers is a slow and gradual process as events start to happen, building to the moment where the full power engulfs and transforms the person. The start of the process is not easy and can be very unsettling, and so for Runestone, it's a difficult thing to confront at first, especially considering she really cares about how Robbie sees her. Now, of course, Robbie has no understanding of this. He thinks her eyes look beautiful. He just accepts this as a part of who she'll become, and he goes with the flow, which will actually become a feature of his life, namely his complete and utter acceptance of Runestone and her powers, which at times Rune does not really or completely understand, as she falls apart as she's forced to confront what will be her future long adult life. As the story progresses and the group head to Kirklees and then down the country, I began the process of taking this first book into a series. My initial thoughts on Heirs to the Kingdom was this was always going to be somewhere around a 5-book series, and I was on book 1. But there would be, to a degree, threads that would take the story forward in future books. Now, part of this was not only developing Robbie and Runestone as people, but also weaving the narrative of what would be the rising power of Mason Knox, who was already much further ahead in the game, as he'd been developing his armies and his strategies for years. Robbie has to evolve into the leader that he's expected to be, and yet he's still very young, and he's prone to moments of bravado and then insecurity. The truth is that he struggles with the pressure of everybody looking to him as they face what are unpleasant truths of the reality that they're living. Rune is at his side, and she can see this, and she tries to help, but she's also going through many changes herself, as like Robbie, she has to cope with her inner powers rising within her. Now, it's clear that there's a lot happening behind the scenes at this point, which I reference in the story as conversations that have gone on in the quieter moments, such as Rune will mention how she's been talking to her mother and using her new powers to talk to her family. Two great examples of this happening are Jade, who has Rune and her mother to help her control her powers. And then later we see Ruby, who mentions she's been lonely and talking with Rune for 3 days. You know, this is the first book, and so it was hard to write everything that's going on in Rune's mind into the story. And so what I had to do was use a series of kind of referencing moments. You know, one such moment was on the journey from Kirklees, where Rune's mind connects with her mother and they start to talk as Stephanie guides her. And then Jet comes in and interrupts and plays a joke. Now, the thing about that little moment there was that was the example that I gave in the story, without labouring the point of how Rune was telepathically connected to all of her family, and so therefore could be walking along looking quite innocent, but having a deep conversation in her mind with the rest of her family. Rune's mind and knowledge are expanding. She's growing at a much faster pace than Robbie. She is, after all, the stone all has been written on, and she's starting to understand that she can manifest a physical effect on her surroundings. We see this with her meeting with Opal, when she learns the real truth of who she will become, and Opal explains how she will live for 10 lifetimes. Runestone's understanding of her destiny is far too much for her to handle, as she suddenly realises that at some point in her life, Robbie, who she's loved for years, is going to die, and she will then be forced to continue to live. And that is something that at that moment, which is the very start of a relationship she has yearned for, it is all just too much, and she struggles to deal with the turbulent emotions that she starts to feel. Now, the world outside of her and around her is affected by this, because it's connecting to her, and she creates a moment of absolute devastation in the surrounding area as storms come in and trees are ripped up. Now, it's from this point onwards that things within the story start to change, and life starts to get really real. You know, war is an ugly thing. And I remember at the time of writing this that, what would become the following chapters. I sat back and considered all that I've read about the young who were drafted into World War II. Now, at that time, young people were filled with the natural exuberance of youth as they enlisted, which was more out of bravado and a sense of duty. But they really had at that moment no understanding of the brutal reality of what they were about to face. Now, it's very much the same for Robbie and Runestone, who to a degree have not really had that much time to really consider what is actually being asked of them. In many ways, it is almost a game. The House of Good Hope has shown them the reality of war and those who suffer, which does, impact on all of them. The sight of starving and wounded children is a real eye-opener for them. But again, even though they witness it and try to do what they can to actually help, it's not really combat. It's not touched them deeply enough to fully get them to understand the implications of what Mason really does intend to fully do. Their fight with the Marshals was fast and fueled by adrenaline as they saved Billy. I mean, they really did not have time to actually sit and consider it, because they had to focus on their escape, which, although scary, was also so wild and unexpected, it did feel almost like a game. Now, the same goes for their rescue of Lord Brandon. It was fueled with energy. They were forced to act fast, not really considering the fact that what they were actually doing was taking the lives of other people. Riding on what they see as a high, they cruise into the castle and begin what is the daring plan to enter Tintagel, which is the rescue of P. And it's once again a fast, action-filled hour with no time for thought. They do what they plan to do, and as they escape with the freed prisoners, filled with their own excitement at having actually pulled it off, they watch as parts of the fortress explode, possibly killing thousands. But it does not register with them. They're too preoccupied with their victory to fully understand the implications of what they've actually done. Now, as much as they are the heroes, they're also a little remote to the whole situation. They're kind of disconnected from it all. All has gone well, and in many ways, as they sail in a high, having rescued Pete to celebrate the reality of war, has not really fully sunken in. To them, it's almost a game, and they're filled with their own sense of pride and their accomplishment. But what they've not realised is they've actually started a chain reaction, because they've struck out at Mason Knox. And this is not a man who is forgiving, and things are about to get very, very real indeed. A very big aspect of the first book, and possibly the second book, which was The Lost Third of Karnak, is to show to a degree the immaturity of young men as they kind of meet the reality of their situation, and they are forced to a degree to grow up. You know, this was very similar for young lads during World War I and World War II, and also in Vietnam. You know, they were young lads out of school. They were immature. They were childlike. They messed about. And then suddenly they're put into a situation where there's death and destruction and sights of horror that they're just not prepared for. And that moment of reality bites really hard. Now, Robbie is, at this point, he's already had his first bite of the reality apple in the sense of Billy, who betrays him. And he feels these vast waves of anger and pain inside him. But the way in which he deals with it is he plans his attack on Tintagel, and he makes that his focus rather than fully facing the actual consequences of what has actually happened. At this point, Runestone's starting to become aware of the bigger picture. Her powers are starting to grow, and she can feel the pain that's inside Robbie. She can see he's hiding it, and in a moment of love, she forces him to express some of it, which is heartbreaking for her to witness. And that really is Runestone's first real taste of reality. Robbie tries to bury his feelings, and he continues, driven by the praise and adoration of those who celebrate his victory at Tintagel. And as he arrives on this wave of confidence, he plans another daring trip to even the score, as he understands a little now of what is happening and how Mason is actually creating and building cannons, which is the one thing that will destroy his home, and he has to find a way to stop it. Now, this is not unsimilar to real war. You know, young men go into basic training seeing themselves as heroes and mighty men. The training is difficult, but it helps them to learn how to react, and so they are taught to use weapons and learn to kill without really understand, what they're actually being trained to do. It becomes, in a sense, second nature, and for Robbie in his woodland life, death is actually a part of his life. He kills animals for food. He understands the taking of life to survive. For most of his life, shooting at things has become, it's more of a sport and a way to pass the time than anything else. Again, it's not real. Not in the sense that at some point, the reality of what he's capable of will really sink in. And that is delivered in the most brutal of ways when he takes a group to attack the weapons plant of Mason. The hard reality of their sort of immaturity and naivety of the group really comes into focus as they sail along the docks, shooting arrows into the burning buildings of Mason's factory. Rune hits an oil tank or some form of explosive storage, and as a result the explosion absolutely devastates the entire weapons plant, achieving their goal. It is a moment of celebration. It's a moment of lack of thought. The death of Eric, who throws himself in front of Robbie to shield him, is like hitting the stop button. They've attacked the weapons plant and it's exploding and burning, and they're also so driven by their sense of accomplishment, they actually forget where they are. At that moment, it is still very much like a game as they dance on the boat. But this is not. This is war, and war is brutal. Robbie looks into the eyes of his friend as Eric speaks his last words and dies in Robbie's arms. It is the most brutal you can get, and the biggest shock to the system of all of them, as they watch Eric's final moments of life drain out of him. Rune stands useless, unable to do anything, shocked to her core and in tears. Everyone around Robbie has no idea what to do. They're stunned into silence and feel this huge wealth of emotion watching their friend die. The only reason no one else is harmed is the very fast thinking of Skip. He pulls up the sails and he is in control of the boat as he pulls it as far away from the scene as he can, and he sails out of the bay. Robbie, for the first time since being made a lord, fully understands the meaning of war. People die, and some of them are people you know and really care about. You know, I've had a lot of flack over the years for killing Eric. You know, in jest, people have called me mean, they've called me a bully, they've talked of how innocent he was and how young he was. Many have made remarks such as, how could you kill Eric? He was so lovely, he did not deserve to die. They're right, he didn't. To be honest, I would find it hard to argue that anyone actually deserves to die. And that is exactly the point that I'm making here in the story. No one deserves to die. And yet in war, they do. Eric was innocent and young. He was kind and considerate. He wanted to be a part of something. He wanted to make something of his life. And yeah, you know, he had hopes and dreams just like the rest of us. But ask me, do I regret killing him off in the story? I will hold up my hands and state quite clearly, no, I do not. Because killing Eric hit everyone hard. And actually, that was the point. I took the one person who was the least offensive and I killed him stone dead right in front of everybody. And I make no apology for it because it served my purpose. That is war. That is the reality of what we ask of our young to do. We take a young person who is innocent, we hand them a weapon, with little real training, and we ask them to line up and die for us. And they do, in unprecedented numbers. So few understand the consequences as they send off their children to war filled with great pride. It is only when they return in a coffin we fully understand what we've actually asked of them and how brutal the world really can be. Robbie and Runestone returned to the castle fully aware of what was now expected of them. And it was at this point, having spent most of the first book developing the characters and getting everybody to care about them, and allowing Robbie and Runestone to bond and fall deeply in love, that was the moment I really began the story of Heirs to the Kingdom. What was to follow would become a story of survival, brutality, shock, fear, love and companionship. It would show the story of two people who loved each other and those who surrounded them as they struggled to survive against a man who wanted to utterly destroy them for no other reason than they were in his way. And they were stopping his dreams and his plans to rule supreme. That is the reality of the world. It's the reality of the world of Heirs to the Kingdom, and it's actually the reality of the world we live in today. Heirs to the Kingdom is a story of survival, dictatorship, and also family. It evolves around a couple who share a powerful love for each other and hold a very simple dream, which is to become the driving force of their struggle to make it through. They dream of family, community, a home, and a small piece of land on which to live and grow their own food. If you think about it, it really is the simplest of dreams. And it's one I would say that most of us hold, and yet they have to go through hell and darkness to attain it. That's the story of Heirs to the Kingdom. That is the series that I have written. It's across 8 books, and it is a wonderful telling of not only a fantasy fictional dystopian life, If you take the time to sit back and really examine the past, it is the story of who we are, where we have come from, and how we have got here. My thank you to everyone who's listened today. As you know, authors need talkers. So if you really enjoy the stories that I have written, please don't be shy, talk about them. Head on to many of my social media sites, add likes, add comments, put down your thoughts, and let's get a conversation around these stories going. Again, with this podcast, it's new. I'm only 7 episodes in. So if you can, please like the videos, subscribe, so that you'll get an advance warning of all my latest podcasts as they come up. And that hopefully will build up the podcast platform so that it gets noticed, and I can get other people who enjoy reading the kinds of stories that I write to come on over and have a listen. And hopefully, if they enjoy what they hear, they will obviously get into Heirs of the Kingdom or The Curios or Hans Cottage or so forth, and they will read the books. Many, many thanks to everyone who has supported my writing life. It is deeply appreciated, and hopefully will allow me to continue to write yet more stories, because I'm always working on something. I've got a brand new fantasy that I'm working on at the moment, as well as continuing with The Curios, and also at this moment in time finishing off the story arc that will run parallel to Heirs of the Kingdom, with the release of The Countess of Darkness, which is coming, followed by the final book in the story arc. My big thanks to everyone who's listened today, and I hope you will all continue to turn those pages, read those books, and take great enjoyment whilst improving your minds. My thank you to all of you.
Thanks for listening to the Writer Life podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, or there are areas of Robin's stories you would like him to discuss, please add your thoughts and questions in the comments, and we will include them in a future episode. You can follow Robin on all his social media links, which you will find listed below. And please, like and subscribe to this channel, so you get the latest notifications when he posts. All Robin's books are available in digital and print formats to purchase or download through all online book sales sites.